Welcome back to my channel. I'm David. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new, this channel is basically to go through my journey building my next startup and also anything business startup related, looking at the whole ecosystem. In today's video, we're going to be discussing a theory that's been on my mind for a while. I suppose you could say it's finding a connection between a philosophical concept or religious concept and business industries. Now, I know bringing those two together, you sort of struggle to see where the connection, where the resemblance is. But if you indulge me for the next 10-15 minutes, I'll try to make it a bit more clearer for you. So looking at a specific philosophical theory here, that being the concept of the seven deadly sins. I think, well, most people would be familiar with the concept or the religious concept of seven deadly sins, which is almost synonymous with, Christianity and Catholicism as well, and how that links to certain industries. Now, as I say, bear with me, I'm going to explain the connection between the two. So if you look at the seven deadly sins, what are they? You've got pride, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, greed, and sloth. So if you take each of these seven deadly sins, which I've sort of displayed now or explained now, you can see how certain industries really uphold and reaffirm those seven deadly sins. So we take the first deadly sin, pride, which can be defined as the excessive belief in one's abilities, leading to arrogance or vanity. Now, looking across the commercial industries, you can see certain industries that come to mind thinking about this. You've got your, the fashion industry, which, if you have the latest garments or the latest clothes, you almost feel as though you are above the rest who haven't been able to get specific, brands or specific limited releases, what have you. And if you think of the cosmetic and the makeup industry, same concept, you look better than the rest, sort of reinforcing that prideful nature. And you can sort of see the connection between that pride as being a seven deadly sin and the industries of, cosmetic, fashion, and so on. And that sort of boils down to the companies being underneath those particular industries. So thinking off the top of my head, LVMH, which is obviously based in France, and how they're, they have loads of luxury brands under their umbrella there, and how they always tend to do very, very well during, tough economical climates. And even if, the whole industry as a whole is suffering, they sort of seem to feel the least amount of pain. Once again, linking back to that whole seven deadly sins, right? And the fashion makeup industry as a whole, and how that connection towards being towards the concept of pride being a deadly sin, and how they still tend to do very well. All you have to do is look at their earnings, especially during tough financial markets. They still somehow, do very well, or they come across as one of the few industries which still thrive during those tough economical climates. So just a connection there. That's just with one of the first ones, pride. Taking another deadly sin, in this case lust, which can be defined as the intense crave for physical pleasures, often sexual in terms of the definition of the word lust. And if you look at that and sort of look at the corresponding industries or commercial industries which support that notion of lust, I mean, the one that's sort of blaringly obvious is the adult industry, right? And how the adult industry itself tends to still do well during tough economical climates, once again. So one notable example I can think of off the top of my head is OnlyFans, right? They've produced record revenues year on year, despite the economical climate across the world and the companies sort of tightening their belts, budgets being dialed back, people being let go from companies. Yet companies such as OnlyFans and their earnings are substantial. Once again, linking back to the whole concept of the seven deadly sin, lust, the industries which support the notion of lust, which, as I said, the adult entertainment industry, and then a notable example, OnlyFans, and how that's all connected. Again, once again, you've got the seven deadly sin, or the deadly sin, the industry which benefits, the industry which supports that deadly sin, and then the companies that benefit from it. Once again, seeing that sort of connection, it's almost like a triangle. If we could use an hierarchy as an analogy to make this a bit more simplified, you've got the deadly sin in question, which we've just gone over, so lust, and then we've got the industry, which is at the second level, which we've sort of used here in terms of lust, which is the adult entertainment industry, and then at the bottom, you've got the companies which benefit from that hierarchy itself. Taking another deadly sin, in this case envy, which can be defined as the desire for someone's status, outcomes, possessions, abilities, right? And the main industry which I think sort of upholds and supports this notion of envy would be media entertainment industry, as supporting the concept of envy. You constantly have the ability to view what other people have who are, doing a lot well, or doing better than you financially, in terms of their resources, in terms of their achievements, their possessions. That's something you're constantly shown. And then at the bottom of that, the kind of industries that benefit, or the kind of companies which are connected to the industries, which I've just sort of mentioned in terms of the media entertainment industries. Examples would be, social media platforms. So, you call it your X, your Instagram, your TikTok, so on and so forth. It's a constant display of other people who have either better skills than you, better resources, nicer houses, nicer cars, so on and so forth. And that creates a perpetual engine of envy, in a sense, because you've got those social media platforms showing you that content or showing you things that you don't have, which builds that level of envy, which is sort of connected to the industry, which is obviously the media industry, entertainment industry, which then links up to the top of the hierarchy table in terms of the notion of envy, right? And if you look at the social media platforms, they're more popular than ever right now. They have billions of users each month who are actively exposing themselves. And that's how you sort of see the cause and link there. So you've got envy, media, entertainment industry, and then at the bottom, social media platforms. And you can sort of see the connection through there and how those platforms are basically, synonymous with life right now. Having a social media presence, which, via this YouTube channel here, sort of shows that notion of one being exposed to people who have more, right? And creates that ecosystem of envy, which just perpetuates on. And that's why those social media platforms are just very, very successful. I suppose you could even say that these social media platforms have formulated or come up with a formula for envy. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Because envy has to be part of the formula to, keep and retain users. So yeah, I suppose you could say these platforms and their algorithms have formulated or created a formula for envy, as well as obviously attention, keeping users on. But I think envy is obviously a significant component to that. And that's why they always do well. That's why these platforms will always do well. I guess you could also argue it's part of human nature as well, in the sense to be envious. Yeah. Moving to another deadly sin, in this case gluttony, which can be defined as, overindulgence or overcompensation to the point of waste. So you've got the concept, or you've got, looking at the hierarchy again, you've got the deadly sin of gluttony, which is at the top, and now looking at the industries which support that. I would say industries, so looking at the industries that support that, I would say, you've got your alcohol industry, you've got your gambling industry. So those are the industries that support or reinforce the notion of gluttony. And then you go into the companies that really benefit from that notion and that connection between, these industries and the concept of, or the religious concept of gluttony as a deadly sin. You have those companies that once again benefit from the notion. So you've got, the Heineken Group, which owns, Guinness, Smirnoff, these sort of large popular alcoholic brands. And then you've got the Diageo Group as well, which another alcohol brand or alcohol conglomerate who, own Guinness, Don Julio, Smirnoff. Once again, these sort of types of companies. And you've got the Heineken Group, who obviously own Heineken. And once again, these companies always tend to do very, very well, irrespective of the, harsh economic climate. And if they are, let's say if the industry as a whole isn't doing as well, they tend to be the ones with the least amount of pain. If other industries aren't doing very well, they always tend to be the ones that are, thriving, or at least feel the least amount of pain compared to other industries. So once again, you've got that connection. So, you've got gluttony as the overarching deadly sin. Then you've got the industries, fast food, gambling, alcohol industries as well. And then you've got the companies, which once again benefit from that reinforcement. So as I said, the Heineken Group, the Diageo Group, McDonald's as well. Once again, you sort of start to see a pattern with these deadly sins, the industries and the companies that benefit from that whole hierarchy. Wrath, another deadly sin, which is defined as uncontrolled feelings of anger, hatred, or violence. You've got wrath, which is your overarching deadly sin, and then following that, you've got the industries which support the concept of wrath, that continued aggression, and the ones that come to mind, you can think of the defense industry, that basically perpetuates and encourages wrath continuously in a sense. And you've got the entertainment industry, which I said as well. Those two, so you've got the entertainment and the defense industry, both, which are the industries which support and reaffirm the notion of wrath as a deadly sin. And obviously going down to the bottom level, you now have companies which benefit from that sort of wrath as the overarching deadly sin, and then the entertainment and then the defense industries which reaffirm that. So you've got companies which, off the top of my head, the UFC encourages wrath to people just going at it as it were, physically engaging in violence. And then you've got, your big defense contractors, or should I say companies such as RTX Corporation, formerly known as Raytheon Industries, your big hitters like Lockheed Martin, who have been, at the forefront of the defense industry for decades, quite frankly, decades. So once again, you have that hierarchy again. You've got wrath as the overarching deadly sin. You can have wrath as the overarching deadly sin. Then you have the defense and entertainment industries which support the concept of wrath as a deadly sin. And then once again, you have the companies underneath which are benefiting and always tend to do well, which just reaffirms the whole notion of the connection between the three. Your Lockheed Martin, whose earnings always tend to be really good. You've got the UFC, who sell a bunch of tickets each time for each fight. Once again, supporting that notion that if you're in an industry that supports one of the 7 deadly sins, they tend to do very well. And lastly, sloth, which I suppose you could just define as laziness, right? Or the inability or hesitancy to work on oneself. A notable industry which I think supports the whole notion of sloth as the overarching deadly sin, you've got your fast food delivery industry, or any industry that encourages or perpetuates the concept of convenience. Yeah, anyone that perpetuates or encourages the concept of convenience as an industry would be in that list there. So you have sloth as the overarching deadly sin. Then you've got the industry, as I said, fast food delivery industry, or any industry that encourages convenience, that supports or reaffirms the concept of sloth. And then you've got the companies, again, which benefit from that. So your fast food delivery, so in the US, your Postmates, In the UK, you've got your Uber Eats, your Deliveroo, and how they all stack up to each other and reaffirm that notion of sloth as a deadly sin. If you look at the earnings for these sort of organizations and companies, once again, they tend to do well, even during, tough economical contractions or climates, because people are willing to pay for convenience, and that convenience once again reaffirms the notion of sloth being a deadly sin. So once again, you've seen that connection between all three. So looking at greed, the excessive want or need which is past that individual's capacity or availability, if you will. Now, if you're looking at that as the top of the hierarchy in terms of the deadly sin, then you look at industries which support greed. I think one that sort of comes in mind is, the financial services industry, which, encourages greed. The greedier you are, the better you'll perform in theory. Obviously, I know this is a very high level outlook of how things would be in industry, but for taking a broad approach, the greedier you are, or the more motivated you are by greed, the more money in theory you'll make. So that links up to the deadly sin of greed. And then if you look at specifics, if you look at the specific companies that benefit, if you look at investment banks, so if you look at your investment banks such as JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, so on and so forth, their investment banking division, they always tend to do really well and have really good earnings. Showing that connection again. Greed, overarching deadly sin, financial services, and then the investment banks, or banks should I say, underneath which benefit really well from that whole connection. Now, by going through each of these deadly sins, you can sort of see the connection between the relevant industries that uphold and affirm them and the companies that are under those industries, which once again uphold and affirm the deadly sin in question. And then looking at how their performance are, or what their performance is, and how they always tend to do well, or relatively well, compared to other industries, and also how during, tough financial times or tough financial circumstances where other industries are really struggling, they either tend to still be thriving or be one of the few industries who still are, who aren't feeling the pain compared to others. So someone who was invest in the public markets or private markets, you would want to look at industries which are connected to these seven deadly sins, as they appear to be almost, consistent in terms of their performance, and they basically tend to do very well during tough economical climates, which it could be argued that we're in right now across the world. I know in the UK we're certainly in a challenging time, to put things lightly, but that's neither here or there. As someone who would be an investor, or me myself who does invest in the stock market, these are the industries that I would look to put my money in, especially during tough economical climates, which, as I've sort of said, we currently are. And obviously with the added context that, this is not financial advice. This is just sort of my theories on, adding or comparing how philosophical concepts sort of link towards certain industries and certain companies, and how the connection between all three and their performance tends to be somewhat consistently good, or at least better than compared to other industries. And the companies I have mentioned, I don't mention them to bash or to say they're negative companies. If anything, it's to say the exact opposite, right? These are the industries which tend to do really well, irrespective of how bad the surrounding industries or the surrounding economical circumstances are. That's it for this week's video. I hope you've enjoyed and somewhat understood this theory I've sort of come up with here in terms of the seven deadly sins, sort of getting a philosophical concept and seeing how it relates to, certain corporate or commercial industries, and how those companies under those industries sort of benefit from this connection to the deadly sins, or how the ethos in these industries are connected and support the seven deadly sins. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to me today. That is it for today, and hopefully next week we'll get back into my new startup, which I'm working on, and the research I'm doing for that. Really excited to bring you guys in on that journey to show you what's going on, how I'm approaching my research and feedback, and how I'm sort of going through that. I think that'd be an interesting video for anyone who's building anything as well. So yeah, thank you, and we'll see you again next week.